All right. Well, I've got Tania with me, a growth consultant and freelancer, working with Malt, I guess, because they're a whole big freelancer community, right? If I got that and understood it exactly. So cool. Well, happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, I'm really happy to talk to you today. You're not.
Yeah. Well, good. Good. It's always good to be referred to people that we both know on the LinkedIn front. Because we're around all the same people all the time, right? Demand gen marketers and marketers talking about this, that, and the other thing. And so I think it's great to have that type of connection. But I wanted to maybe give a little precursor for people that are just tuning into this episode of like what we're going to be talking about. But then I want to pull it back to you real quick. But ultimately, we wanted to get into some things around budget cuts that are happening right now, and I'd love to even hear from a European perspective too, because you're in France, to hear how much that's been the same type of trend that's happening in the US right now. I'd imagine similar, but certainly in the US, lots of marketing teams have had their budgets cut. Many people have been let go, especially in the tech and SaaS space where I predominantly play, and I know you play more in the tech space as
Okay.
well. And so we definitely want to chat about that. And then if there's time, which I will try to kind of keep going through this, then we want to get into some things related to talking a little bit of inbound marketing versus lead gen and really how that ties into some of these budget cuts, because a lot of people are looking at budgets, trying to figure out what drives pipeline and revenue and how to spend their dollars better. And so we clearly want to be taking the right types of approaches. And so maybe we could go back and forth on that. But before we get into any of that, as the precursor, do you want to just maybe talk very quickly about some of the work that you do typically with clients and maybe the type of client you work with, just as a kind of brief little overview so people have an idea about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So
Sweet.
basically, I work with companies either as a consultant or as a fractional employee. In my mantra or my objective has always been to grow, to bring growth, to help them grow. And now, in the last
Mhm.
years, last months, like the big objective is uh, to grow, but to grow efficiently. We are trying to
Mm,
do more with less. So I think that now everything should revolve around this kind of new trend that turns around being more efficient and about putting the customer in the center. So basically, that's the
mm.
kind of work that I do. And in those type or work with this objective in mind, what I do is to specialize in methodologies that have this kind of mantra. So I work
Mm.
specifically on ABM, demand gen, and then revenue operations.
Got it. Got it. So a lot there. What would be a good example of a project that you typically do a lot? It sounds like something you'd come in and say build out an ABM strategy, for example, for a tech company and help them do account selection to building out custom content to figuring out what the flows are going to be, what the follow ups are going to look like for different accounts. Is that the type of thing? Just to get into
Absolutely.
a practical
Is
example?
that
Yeah.
absolutely?
Okay.
So I'm often
Cool.
asked to be an ABM campaign. And then once I I start working on that specific ABM project, and realize that
Mm.
we need to do some previous foundational work. And that's where I start
Mm.
working another, let's say, cross-functional or more holistic fields. And that's where I work with or other departments to find marketing, sales, and customer care alignment. And then I have to, at some
Yeah.
point, to start working also on the tech stack. And at
Hmm.
some point,
Mhm.
because AVM is quite complex, or we need to kind of work on some foundational work before. But at some point, we need to work also on demand gen. So before getting
Right.
to AVM, I usually work on other previous fields, on other previous steps that go around full funnel marketing, about rebobs, about
Right.
demand generation.
Right, exactly. It's always funny for me, and I mean this in the best way possible, but I came from sales originally before I get into marketing. And for me, we always did what I would call ABM in a very traditional sense. We had a list of very specific target accounts. Usually, depending on the size of them, there were no more than 10 or 25 per quarter. We'd have personalized emails and even to a degree content, not always coming from marketing, but sometimes produced by sales that then was delivered to those different people. And so maybe there weren't the coordinated display ad attacks, and maybe marketing was not also going after the same accounts on paid or other channels and things like that. We also did events and things. And so for me, like ABM from a marketing perspective is interesting. I think it's a great thing that marketing's getting more aligned with sales and the accounts that they're going after and trying to help them. But kind of a sidebar to your point there, but we can get into that and more in a second. But I guess to get into the heart of what we want to chat about, because your point, yeah, I think the expression "do more with less," right? Everyone's talking about that. I think it's funny to see too. Lots of ads have started keying off those same keywords. I think we're almost getting a little bit of like the same headline over and over again because everyone is saying similar things right now because we all want to get more efficient, which should be the case anyway. But budget cuts. So clearly, budgets have been cut. And my context on this before I let you kind of take the reins on this and give yours is that, clearly we've got longer sales cycles. We've got people that are delaying purchases on various different
Mhm.
products. And then you also have the side of just from an investment perspective, you've got a lot of startups that say have 12 to 18 months of runway. They're burning that cash. It's getting harder to get debt and or equity based off of high interest rates and rising inflation, certainly in the US market. And so with that, all that's creating a storm of, all right, we need to let some people go, especially on the marketing side, because a lot of the things that we're doing on the marketing side are not leading to pipeline of revenue right now. And also, two, we need to conserve some of that runway. And so whether it's cutting paid ads or dropping people or other types of programs, all those things are kind of being considered. And so what's your kind of take? I mean, maybe certainly the European market would be kind of interesting just because we don't talk about Europe quite as much on this show. If you're seeing some specific things that are interesting with marketing teams in Europe, or if you think it's kind of all the same thing, you could answer it more broadly. But, how should marketing teams kind of think about responding to some of these budget cuts? Any thoughts there or things you're talking with your clients about?
Yeah, so here in Europe, we are seeing quite of the same outcome or the same result is budget being cut. Um, the the main difference here is that the type of methodologies or programs that are being cut are different. Um,
Hmm.
in the US or in Europe or worldwide, I think that we get too much hype on specific methodologies. So today we are
Mhm.
talking about ABM. Okay, we want high paying clients with a high ARR. We need ABM, and that's like a kind of shortcut, right? Or the kind of phrase that we put out in meetings, right? So in the US,
Mm.
we are talking about ABM, we are talking about RevOps, we are talking about demand gen. So those are the programs that are gaining attention and that are not suffering as much from those budget cuts. And here in Europe,
Hmm.
it's quite different. Maybe CEO or programs or initiatives are being cut,
Hmm.
but we are investing quite heavily on paid ads.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the take that I have from Europe is that we are too dependent on leads. We are still
Hmm.
too much lead focused. So I think that the result is the same. The way we approach or we address uh, that reality is completely different.
Hmm. Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's so interesting, the dependency on leads. I mean, that's been a conversation I know for a long while, for a few years at least, where there's been heavy conversation and content delivered on making sure that marketers are actually being, uh, responsible for pipeline and revenue or have some level of accountability. Because, the common scenario, at least in my world from the paid perspective, is, and you probably know this all too well, it's you've got a Google Ads account and you see a keyword that has a really low cost per lead, and you say, hey, great, like maybe we can spend more money on this keyword. Or maybe we can get the cost per lead down even further through XYZ bid strategies, or you name it, or better text ads. But then you realize, like down funnel, that keyword, while it converts at a really high rate, for some reason, and something that needs to be discovered, none of them convert into opportunities. And so then you say, well, wait a minute, to your point on too dependent on leads, you're like, okay, marketing thinks, hey, we're doing our job, everything's going well, but really there's a big problem there because a lot of those folks are not turning into revenue at the end of the day. And so maybe it's actually the keywords that are 2 to 3 times the cost that actually have a much better downstream conversion rate. And those are some of the things that we should consider. Do you see a lot of that? I mean, in terms of, that focus or those conversations, it sounds like they're starting to happen, but to your point, is most marketing needs are still that you can see in Europe still compensated more on leads and MQLs and those types of metrics is
Absolutely.
what I
So
hear.
we are still, I think that we are too much like for our model is very, very much lead based. Um,
Yeah.
it's like we have two departments or three departments, customer facing departments. We have sales, we have marketing, then customer care. And we are
Right.
too much focused maybe on delivering on our department objectives rather than about having like the big picture. That's something that we are
Right.
still working on in the US, but we
Yeah.
are a little bit behind. However, there are some companies that here in Europe that are pioneering this kind of mindset shift and that are
Right.
doing a really great job here. So I think that
Right.
we are a little bit on the same boat when it comes to Europe. In the US, the thing is that maybe you are taking the lead to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, totally possible. Well, then I guess the big question to me then, and the thing that, marketers are always plagued with is trying to figure out, all right, well, what do we cut? If we are going to cut something, and let's say it's not people, let's say it's programs, and that could be events, paid ads, SEO, the podcast, less focus on brand awareness, more on lead gen, or vice versa, those types of things. Like, are there any things that you're seeing that are potentially more common to cut, or maybe even some learnings when you're getting into accounts and you're like, hey, we just uncovered something that really isn't actually working and we need to move this direction, or so on and so forth? Anything like that stand out to you when like putting your kind of CMO hat on for a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think that here we need to be very pragmatic. And we need to come back to the basics, to the foundations. We are not talking here about
Mm,
sophisticated like frameworks or methodologies like ABM or RevOps. I think that we have to come back
mm,
to the basics, to the foundations of marketing itself. And what I do with my clients is to follow a 4-step process that it's
mm.
quite straightforward. And first off,
Yeah.
I focus on knowing the customer and the market better. As marketers, or we rarely have enough market and customer insights. In many teams, when we create campaigns, we have very little data and insights to back it. So I think that
Mm,
now is the perfect moment to move from that kind of gut feeling or more subjective way
mm,
of working to a more data and insight driven approach.
mm,
And to do so, from a practical point of view, what I do with my clients is to do three strategic assets. First, the ICP. Secondly,
mm,
the buying committee and the buyer journey. And then
mm,
based on them, I build the marketing plan and I prioritize
mm,
marketing initiatives. Then once I have those strategic assets, those that market and customer knowledge, the second step for me is to analyze historical or baseline data. The thing here is that we
mm,
have tons and tons of data, but we don't really leverage that data. Sometimes that data is not correct or we don't have the full picture. So I think that
mm,
um, if we have that objective of allocating the reduced budget smartly, we can do a lot of things here. What I like to do on
Mm,
my side is to, instead of cutting a little bit of all programs and channels, that's unfortunately what we usually do, is to focus on the best performing programs. And
mm,
for that, I use a very basic management tool that is the COVID Matrix. And the way I go about it is, on one side or on one axis, um, I pinpoint or I list the high or low impact initiatives,
mhm,
and then on the other axis, the high or low effort. And the idea
mm,
here, first of all, is to pinpoint those initiatives that yield high results, and then to double down
mm.
here.
Right.
Of course, we have to take into account the full funnel, because maybe we have
Mm,
some actions that yield very little results, but that take a very important role in the big picture, in the whole buyer journey. And then I do the opposite. I pinpoint and then stop or quit those that require high effort and that yield low end. And
mm,
then here, at the same time, what I do is to adopt a full funnel approach, as I said before, um, based on the ICP, based on the buying committee and the buyer journey. And I think that is the best moment to map out the different touch points along the buyer journey. And instead of
mm,
developing like isolated uh, initiatives, or what we often call the random acts of marketing, um,
mm,
I here what I do is to try to create a plan to bring together all the touch points and to create
mm,
content experiences around the buyer journey. And
mm,
then lastly, what I do is also to work along with other departments and see how we can create a coordinated and a shared plan to bring revenue.
mm. I like that. I mean, I think you said a couple things there that I think are worth pointing on. I mean, I think a lot of this does come back to the basics. And I actually posted about this on LinkedIn, I think last week or something. And it's that your paid media, and I'm going to speak from a paid perspective, of course, but your paid media strategy is not separated from your marketing strategy. They are interconnected, they're an extension of one another, right? So, all the things like positioning, messaging, your target customer, pricing, packaging, all the typical things like that are done by marketing and the product marketing team all bleed into everything you do from a paid media strategy perspective. So to your point, coming back to the basics is saying, hey, let's relook at some of the things that, where are we focusing today? Are we focused on, for example, our dream clients? Because something we see all the time is people want to win Salesforce or Amazon or this or that, but all their customers are SMB. And it's not to say they can't win those deals. It's just that if we think about where we can win today, well, where we have social proof and case studies, you could provide potentially a lot better results and get more efficient, even with the same budget or less budget, by, to your point, going back to the basics. So to me, I think that's the unlock is, you know, I think you don't always have to cut programs, but if you can look at how you're executing from a fundamental perspective, and that goes up to just like the basic
Or
fundamental marketing strategy, a lot of the other things in terms of paid, SEO, events, content, all those things will start improving and you'll start to see better results ultimately from a pipeline and revenue perspective. So I think there's that point. The other point you mentioned too, which I think is a really good one, is mapping the buyer journey. And I know Vlad, if you follow fullfunnel.io, those guys love
Mhm.
to talk about this. And I think they do a great job with some of their content. But they, the big thing I think they talk about, and I know I agree too, is that it's not necessarily about trying to programmatically move someone from the top to the bottom or the left to the right or whatever direction you want to go. It's just about understanding, like, hey, what are the questions the buyer's going to have along the journey? And then how do we make sure we have content or pages that help answer those questions? And to me, that's the big thing, right? Versus trying to say, all right, they consume tofu content. So, okay, cool. Let's give them the mofu content and then let's move them into the bofu and so on and so forth, right? And it's like, That would be cool to work that way. And yeah, people ultimately, I guess, move their way down the funnel, quote unquote, but they don't necessarily do it in a linear fashion, as we all know and have probably heard too much about, right?
Absolutely. Where I think that most of the marketers, between marketers, we come from an um, inbound background, and we used to think that buyer journeys were linear. But we are
Mm,
seeing also today, thanks to or due to the dark social, that they are not linear. There's a customer, there's a
yeah.
buyer that can be doing like back and forths on different different channels or touch points during months. So
Yeah.
I think that that's really key to have like the buyer journey to map it out and to see also what is the overarching plan that
Mm.
that
Agreed.
makes that all the touch points uh, play around and work along together.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, it's funny. You just made me think of something earlier that's related to kind of talking about full funnel again that I think is important to bring up. But one of the people I was talking to was saying that they're looking to actually move some of their budget away from other programs and go all heads down on outbound right now, because outbound they're seeing better success with in terms of conversion rates and conversion rates from lead to pipeline, et cetera. And the one question I asked him was, okay, well, so were there any other touch points along the journey that some of those people that we were reaching out to were also getting? For example, from marketing, whether it be a webinar, content, ad impressions, things like that. And he kind of was a little bit hesitant to really even answer that because he wasn't even thinking through the other possible touch points in the journey. It was really just like, hey, I know my SDR sent an email, they got a response back, and now it's an opportunity. And therefore, my cost is X, and I want to do more of that versus thinking about the impact that other channels have. And so I think that's the really tough thing about cutting budget too, is I'm sure you'd agree, is that when when you're a multi-channel, multi-programmed technology company, meaning across Google Ads, LinkedIn, Facebook, whether paid or organic, you're running events, you're running podcasts or this or that. Like when you've got a lot of those things going on, it's very rare that there's going to be a situation when sales single sourced a deal. And if they did, I'd almost say there's a lack of alignment between marketing and sales, but I wanted to get your take on that. I mean, do you have a strong thought there about how that relates to cutting budgets when you look at things kind of
Yeah.
siloed like this, which is a very common thing that we all do? And so,
So coming back to your point about like outbound like marketing, I've also like had this same experience. I see that that there are companies that are um, doing outbound with a more kind of account-based marketing approach to it. Um,
mm,
and there's something that I think that is usually um, underrated, and it's the importance of email marketing, like outreach. We are not talking here about cold outreach. We are talking about being much more creative about how we
sure.
reach out to our buyer persona or our buying committee members.
Mhm.
But I think that here we get too much sophisticated about a lot of channels, as you said, like LinkedIn, Facebook, even TikTok, or here we're talking about B2B. And if we ask ourselves or if we wonder, what is, for example, when we are working, what is the place or what is the channel where we spend most of our time? It's email.
Mm,
So I think
mm,
that that's in kind of undervalued and
mm,
underrated channel that we don't make the most of it. Of course, it's super
yeah.
difficult to be able to nail it down. But for those professionals that nail it down, I mean, they can be like marketing superstars.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think I don't have the most recent stat in my head, but I think the last time I remember someone doing some research around this, it was like 2 to 3 hours a day on email.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's a lot of your day on email. And then I've heard LinkedIn ranges anywhere between like 7 to 20 minutes. Facebook, Instagram is longer, closer to email, 2 to 3 hours. And other channels I don't have off the top of my head. But I know there's some stats that I remember from a while back from some studies some folks did. And so to your point, I mean, email's definitely not dead. It just needs to be done and executed in a better way. But I think for me, it just comes back to thinking about things from a full funnel perspective and making sure we don't totally isolate a channel by itself. And it's important to measure it. It's not to say we shouldn't measure it at all. It's just that we've got to consider some of the impacts that other channels are having on that. For example, a common thing that always happens, and we've actually done this with a number of clients and seen this, is after running advertising for a period of time to a list of target accounts that sales is already targeting, when they're reaching out from an outbound perspective to those accounts, their conversion rates are higher than they were before because they've already been exposed to the brand, their content, thought leadership, all sorts of things. And so it plays into a proven psychological hack, which is the familiarity bias. And
Absolutely.
so when we're used to seeing the name, if like I see your name on LinkedIn over and over and over again because you post content, then all of a sudden I just trust you more if you were to reach out to me on outbound because I'm like, I know who you are. Or maybe I don't know exactly what you've said, but your name seems really familiar. And I think that's a hard thing to kind of like go into your CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce and say, boom, this was it. But these things happen. And, you can see it, from a correlation perspective when you look at the data. So I think that part's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn trust is paramount. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. We could talk about budget cuts all day, but let's move on to kind of the other 2 points we wanted to get into a little bit more. But we had kind of discussed the differences. There's a lot of conversation around lead gen versus demand gen. I think you even mentioned the word inbound marketing, even versus lead gen. And so we've discussed a lot of people saying lead gen's completely dead. They shouldn't use it anymore. And then obviously a cohort of people that say, nope, if it's done right, if you have the right types of follow up motions with certain lead gen types of programs, it can actually work fine. And what's your take on that? I'll kind of give mine after, but what's your kind of take? And maybe you have a different one with the European market lens to see if anything's being done differently or thought about in a unique way there.
Yeah, I think that no matter or regardless of the methodology, I think that we are we are considering methodologies as if they were fashion trends. Um, we
Mm.
often hear like now in the US, like ABM or RevOps or Tema Gen is in and then the Gen is out. Um, in
Mhm.
I think that before going on out on a specific methodology, we rarely analyze whether it is the most convenient for us and
Mhm.
whether a company is ready for it. And as I told you before, as a consultant, I'm often asked to launch an ABM campaign. And what I always do with my clients is to take a step backwards and to do a go-to-market strategy diagnosis. And here I realize or I see that most of my customers or most of my clients are not ready for that specific methodology, or that there's a
Mm.
methodology that will allow them to yield results much more rapidly. So I think that we prioritize the methodology rather than the results that we want to get. And sometimes we also
Mm.
prioritize the technology to it.
Mm.
Um, so coming back to lead gen that we discussed before, um, I think that in the past we thought that it was the silver bullet, and
Mm.
the principle behind it. So the principle about collecting contact data from our prospects with the objective of converting them was a super good idea. But the idea behind or the effort that it requires for us is to nurture those needs properly so that they can convert. But the main issue was that we didn't nurture them properly.
Mm.
Why? And did we do that? Because at the end of the day, it's the same thing. We want to rush results. And now,
Mm.
as you said before at the beginning of our conversation, we want results we have a lot of pressure on results, um, and we want silver bullets. We want to do things
Mm.
overnight. So there's no those type of things are not going to be solved or addressed by a specific methodology.
I think you nailed it on your last point, and let me know if I am misunderstanding what you mean by we didn't nurture the leads properly. But I'll give you my take on this, and then let me know if you have a slightly different one. But I mean, I think the big thing with lead gen is that it was treated as, to your point, a short term way to drive ideally opportunity and revenue. And I think for a period of time, it worked really well. I think buyers have gotten smart and gotten a little bit annoyed with the type of motion that's being run because it doesn't really align well with the buyer journey. Because if we take a step back and think about it, I mean, the basic definition of lead gen predominantly is associated with usually bottom of the funnel campaigns, potentially on Google Ads, or more commonly, gated content through like ebooks, guides, templates, things like that, where the company will create that piece of content, they'll promote it on a channel, and then they'll send those leads to the SDR team to follow up with them to set a meeting for a demo or another sales conversation. And that's been the playbook for a while now. I think a lot of more modern SaaS brands are not doing that at all. And so for some listening to this, they're probably like that. And that's old news. For some folks that are a little more mature, they're saying, oh, yeah, we still do a lot of that. And so I think the issue more so is like, we're just not aligning the intent level from a lead gen perspective well with what the buyer actually is looking for. And so to your point back on nurturing, it's saying, okay, wait a minute. The person was interested in the content, they weren't asking us for a demo. So why don't we actually follow up with some type of email or response either around the content, do a content collaboration or something else, or just add them to a newsletter where we're giving additional valuable content that they already liked and then let them come in when they're ready. Doesn't mean we can never go outbound to them. We can do all sorts of things from a marketing perspective, like I just mentioned, but it just means that they're not ready for a salesperson to reach out and say, hey, like, let's go and get on a demo. And so I think to me, that's the big miss is that when you look at conversion rates from, say, high intent demos to gated content downloads, like, obviously demos convert better than gated content. I've never seen it otherwise, ever.
Mhm.
And so it's like, okay, that's fine. Let's just make sure that we take the lead gen aspect, if we are going to run a portion of that, and just have the right type of follow up motion. Did I? What do you think? Do you agree with that, or do you have a slightly different take in terms of some things that you've seen successful with just the way we're nurturing, whether it's legions from a legion type of motion or really any type of person that maybe engages with our content?
So to your point about like content, I think that we don't stress too much on content. Content is the cornerstone of all B2B methodology,
Hmm.
and it should be our compass. It should be our main focus. And the thing here, as I 100% agree with you, is that we were not creating content the right way. And no matter the methodology, ABM, inbound, lead gen, everything, I mean, all the methodologies lay on the same principle. It's about connecting with your audience in the correct place at the right time with a relevant message. And to
Yep.
your points about the right time, um, or about the correct time, the thing here is that we usually miss that. It's like we are not adopting a buyer first approach. We are adopting a company first approach. When I mean company first approach is about us. When we have some spare
Mm.
time, then we send a message. Or when we have a little bit of time, then we organize or orchestrate a campaign of HubSpot, for example. So I think that content in the buyer journey should be like, and of course, the ICP and the buying committee should be like our compass to define what type of content we create, because the thing behind, I mean, the what we want at the end of the day is content to resonate with the people, with that audience, and we usually forget about it.
Yeah. Content is so important. That's a good point too about the whole demand gen and for ABM too, right? Because ABM is really just a very targeted, specific strategy to a given set of accounts, usually very small with higher ACV potentials, et cetera. So we're all trying to do the same thing here. Like it doesn't matter what the methodology is, I think is your point, and I would agree, is that we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to create great content and we're trying to connect pain points to solutions that we have in our products to ultimately help customers. And whatever way you want to approach it, whether it's a broader based approach like demand gen is, or whether it's more narrow like ABM, where you've got a very handful of select accounts where you're personalizing content, landing pages, making sure that you've got target account was loaded up into LinkedIn ads or whatever channel you're going after. I mean, we're talking about a lot of the same things here. And so I think it gets confused quickly that, oh God, to your point, like we've got to do more demand gen. And then also too, we have to think about, do we have content good enough for that type of motion as well? And so if we start ungating things and doing other things that are associated with demand gen, even though I'd say these are all just marketing types of programs and strategies as normal, right? They're just associated with demand gen. We've got to have great content because lead gen has the benefit of your content honestly doesn't need to be that great in a way because the ultimate goal really of lead gen is to get an email address. And so as long as you've got a good piece, a good ad with a good headline that gets the email for a cheap rate, boom, you're in business. But that doesn't work that way in demand gen world. And so we got to have still great content that connects with the buyer, helps them better understand how to a problem that they have or a want that they're looking for, so on and so forth. But I want to move on to one thing before we wrap up on this. And so it's more about like moving forward and saying, okay, cool. We've talked a little bit about lead gen. We know some of the issues. You made the big point that like ultimately it's about just not nurturing the leads properly and making sure we have the right approach based on where they are on the journey. And I completely agree. Then there's like, all right, well, what is the modern playbook look like? And maybe you can speak more from an ABM perspective, because I know you said before you do a little bit more on the ABM approach if you want to go that angle, or if you want to broaden it out, that's okay too. But what are like three things you see that technology companies or SaaS companies are doing really, really well with respects to marketing? Anything that maybe practically someone could take away that they should be thinking about doing, minus of course going back to the basics, as you mentioned?
Yeah. So today the marketing playbook is a lot about a mindset. I think that
Mm,
business plans and departments plans, regardless of the department, are much more about being customer centered, uh, about being business oriented, and about having a more holistic approach. Um, so now, if we deep dive into those three marketing trends or that are really important today, I would say first of all, full funnel marketing. Um, Here, as we have just discussed before, it's about making sure that all the marketing initiatives revolve around the buyer journey. I think that this is maybe one of the most difficult points for companies because that means that all customer facing departments have to be aligned around that buyer journey and that they have to orchestrate their initiatives accordingly. Um, Then another priority or another playbook trend today is content. I mean, we've been talking about content.
mhm,
And here I think that um, it is about focusing more about repurposing already existing
mm,
content. We have tons and tons of content. We've been creating content for the sake of creating content. And now there's a priority to repurpose that content in an efficient and in a smart way. Um, Related to content, we are also talking about moving away from isolated pieces of content to holistic content experience. Well, I would say that
yeah,
those are like the
agreed.
main character, the main trends or the new points in the 2023 playbook, content in
Yeah.
full funnel marketing.
Agreed. And I think on the repurposing point, I think it's a good one too. And I talk about this a lot, but you could take the example of a maybe some proprietary research that you did. And let's say that you put that in an ebook or a guide and you're still running a Legion type of motion to that. You could easily still gate it fine, but you could probably break up that piece of content into a whole number of different pieces. I mean, you could probably create 15 different ads that had some of the statistics or graphs or takeaways from that really cool research that you did. And I think a good example of this that I talk about on other episodes is Gong. I think is well known for doing this, but there's so many companies that can do this, so many. But Gong uses a lot of the data that they gather from all these people that are connected to Gong's platform to then provide insights out. And so that's where they started Gong Labs ages ago. This is old news now, but they did a really great job of distributing lots of those insights across all channels, whether it be paid, organic, events. They did a lot of gated too, and so there were just a lot of different things that they were doing around that. And so, to your point, if you've got some of these assets, you don't necessarily need to do a whole nother research study. You maybe just need to figure out some other better ways where you can redistribute that content, assuming it's good and it's still relevant and all those things, right? And so I think that's a big point. Anything that you think you would stop doing if you were to like see people making one mistake or a couple different mistakes where you're like, oh my gosh, like this is something when I walk into a company and I'm starting my audit, they need to really stop doing XYZ things. Anything that stands out in your mind there?
So I would say tons of them, but maybe I would, just to name a few, I would say like ebooks or super generic, um,
Like
prepackaged kind
generic
of
content?
ebooks or a standalone type of content pieces, like creating one ebook for the sake of it, or creating just one ad that doesn't,
Hmm.
for example, doesn't resonate with the audience. There's something that I that that I usually wonder when I see a content is this specific content or the claim or the info inside, does it resonate with the buyer persona or the buying committee member challenge or pain points? And most of the time, it's
Hmm.
just content that is talking about how great a company is, or how
Right.
great, uh, how great products they have. So I think that those are like the things that shock me most, let's say. Yes.
Right. That's a good point, and that's a big one that I think I hear all the time on LinkedIn and also in a lot of these side conversations outside of it is, yeah, avoiding making the content itself all about your product. I would say there's a balance to this, and there should be some level of a dotted line back to your product. I mean, until you become a really big brand where you can make these big bets on producing content that isn't really, I mean, maybe it's interesting for the actual audience, but there's no dotted line back to your product whatsoever. I would suggest that those are dangerous things to do in the beginning because it's really important that ultimately the content you're producing lines up with a couple of core messaging themes of your core point of view that you're trying to communicate, ideally that wraps up into your strategic narrative, and then making sure your content, whether it's a blog or guide or whatever format, video, this, that, the other thing you want to create, lines up with that narrative and has a dotted line back to your product. Now, you don't need to explicitly say, buy my stuff, right? Or get a demo
Exactly.
or whatever you want to put, so the content should be about,
Yeah.
giving quote unquote value, which everyone hates that word now, but being educational, helping people solve problems, aligning with things they want to learn, etc. And then when they're ready, because a lot of times when we're talking about problems, people are like, okay, so what's the solution? And so there's nothing wrong with you being the solution of that. In fact, sometimes I get a little bit annoyed when I'm reading a piece of content, and it rarely happens because most people, of course, put this stuff in. Where you're reading something that's like, oh man, this is awesome. You're getting me all jazzed. Like, I agree, I agree. And oh, so what do I do? We all want to know what we do at the end because ultimately it's something that's kind of annoying us, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be reading the content. So I think that's a solid point. And then your last thing I just to comment on is being specific. And sometimes to your point, content gets too broad and then we ignore it. If it's really specific and related to exactly you, then all of a sudden you're going to click it. So you're getting potentially smaller reach, smaller audience, but you're getting a lot more engagement from the audience
Absolutely.
that it's actually for.
Exactly.
And so I think that's a really solid point, especially from your ABM experience. Make perfect sense why you'd say that.
Yeah.
So, well, this has been good. Anything that maybe we left out that you want to mention in terms of the overall content, anything you think is important to mention before we jump off here?
No, I think that we are pretty much
We
good.
nailed it?
Yeah,
We nailed it? All right, sweet. I like that. I'm sure we could probably talk for another hour
yeah,
about all sorts of stuff,
absolutely. Yeah,
but it's getting late. You need to get some dinner, and I need to probably get some lunch over
yeah.
here
Lunch for you,
before
I
I jump
guess.
into some more
Yes.
calls. But where can people find you if they want to reach out? What's the best way to find you? Either email, website, just go to your LinkedIn. What's the best way to people to find you if they wanted to chat with
Yeah,
you?
so you can certainly, I mean, you can reach out to me and it's on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I really enjoy that platform. So I post twice a week in the platform. So I'm always happy to engage with other fellow like marketers and in people there.
Well, it's a pleasure having you for a little bit. And, if I ever make my way out to Europe again, like we talked about before, because I was just your way not too long ago, a month ago, I was in Spain and Switzerland,
Yeah.
then I'd love to get together.
Yeah. So let me know at that moment. Yeah, sure. It was a
Yeah.
pleasure
Well, cool,
to
cool.
talk to you today, Jonathan.
100%. 100%. We'll call it there. Thanks again. All right. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of the Demand Podcast. Again, I'm Jonathan Bland, the co-founder of Omni Lab. I'll also have with me Jason Steele, who's the other co-founder of Omni Lab on this podcast as well. We're a demand gen agency for seed to Series B SaaS startups. If you like this episode or you're looking for some help with demand gen, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn over a DM, or you can go just directly to our website. That's omnilabconsulting.com. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the next episode where we'll be talking about all things demand gen. Until then, thanks. Bye-bye.